things I really love about the job that I do is that I get a lot of opportunities to get out and talk to people, particularly now about learning and education, because that's the work that I've been doing recently. And the people that I've been able to talk to have been educators of all stripes, whether it's kindergarten teachers, school board supervisors, college professors, professors of education, all these different people that I've been able to talk to, all have given me a lot of valuable perspectives. But perhaps the most interesting one happened this year at a conference in Chicago. I was giving a talk there, and I had the opportunity to engage with the audience. And the audiences were made up of about 100 corporate trainers. It's not an audience I speak to a lot, but it's sort of within the education realm. And I had the opportunity to ask them some questions. And the first question I asked them is, when my students leave the classroom or leave the university experience, and you train them, how long does it take from the time they walk in your door to the time they start working to be fully trained? And they all discussed it and went on for a little bit. And they came back and said about a year. It takes about a year to really get them completely trained. That's very interesting. Said, and once they're trained, how long until that knowledge becomes obsolete? I said, about 3 months. Right? So this is the first problem. And then I said, how many of you have had the experience of a student walking in, interviewing them, and thinking, this is someone who's going to change my company? And you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody has that experience. And that was a moment that still haunts me, because that's my sphere of influence. And I had to ask myself a kind of tough question, which is it that I'm not training people to be innovative? If I'm not training them to be game changers? Is it the training process? Is it the university education process? Is it my classroom? Is it the students? I didn't really know. So I started to think long and hard about what happens in our classrooms. And I came to the conclusion that there were two things that were really important to me. The first was that my students get to play. And by play, I mean something specific. For me, play is the emergent property of the application of rules to the imagination. You have a constraint, and you have imagination. You put them together, and you get something that we could call play. That raises the question, what is imagination? And for me, imagination is a very simple concept composed of only two words, which I believe may be the two most powerful words in the English language. What if? So I started to take these ideas and put them into practice in my classroom over the course of several years, and really kind of experimenting with, I won't say on, my students, and hearing what they had to say about this. And I learned a lot from them. But there's 4 things I want to share with you today that have been particularly important to me. The first one is that innovation in the 21st century has become more about context than content. And the place I learned this was from a conversation I had with my students where I asked them a question. I said to them, who do you trust? And for people of my generation, that's a very easy question to answer, because we grew up in an era where you would watch TV, and if Walter Cronkite said it, you pretty much believed it was true. If it was in the New York Times, back when they did things like fact-checking and there was no 24-hour news cycle, right, you pretty much believed it was true. And if it wasn't true, it would be corrected. And maybe there's a certain naivete to that, but we had a notion of content having truth. And if you wanted to change the context of what something meant, you needed to go buy a newspaper or a radio station or a TV station. These kids have grown up in a generation where changing context is as easy as getting a book like Adobe Premiere for Dummies, right? Getting some video, remixing it, and putting it up on YouTube. Right? You don't believe me? Go to YouTube and look up a video called Scary Mary. It is Mary Poppins recut as a horror film. And it's brilliant. If you didn't know better, you believe it was a horror film. So I asked them who they trusted, and they said to me, no one. And at first I thought they were being cynical. But what they were actually saying to me was no one in particular. For them, something isn't true until they hear it from 6, 7, 8, 9 different sources. And if all that information triangulates, then they start to believe it. Right? So our conversation eventually comes around to Wikipedia, as these things always do. The bane of professional educators everywhere. Right? And they said to me, we don't understand why you people, meaning professors, are so upset about Wikipedia, right? And I realized that to us, Wikipedia is about content. Is it accurate? To them, it's just another context, right? Now, I had to come face to face with the fact that I too am just another context, right? And that's a very different world than what I grew up in and what university education has been before me. Which brings me in my second point, that university classrooms are themselves contexts, and we need to be respectful of that. And I had a remarkable experience teaching a games class before games classes were popular. And I had taught it in a massively multiplayer online game called Star Wars Galaxies, which is now defunct. Before games were popular, I decided I really needed to load my syllabus up so my colleagues would think I was doing something serious. So I had readings from Martin Heidegger, right? I had René Descartes, I had Jacques Derrida, I had the most highbrow theory you could possibly find because I wanted people to know this was serious business. And the class was 3 hours a week. First hour and a half, I would lecture on the classics of continental philosophy and what have you. We'd do a half hour of discussion where they would bat the ideas around. And then the rest of the time, they would do a show and tell because they were actually playing the game and finding things that related to the readings in it. About the third week, I realized they were coming in and saying, I know we do the lecture, we know the discussions, but you've got to see this cool thing, right? You just got to see this. So by the fifth week, 2.5 hours of show and tell, 15 minutes of running through some of the lecture material, and 15 minutes of discussion saying, please, please remember, read Heidegger, So at this point, I go home to my partner, 5 weeks in, and I said, I've completely lost control of my class. I'm teaching them nothing. And I was right. Didn't mean they weren't learning. And when I got their midterm exams back, I was bowled over because they were talking about things in the game, but they were talking about them in terms of Donna Haraway and René Descartes and Martin Heidegger. They had gotten it, and they had done the readings on their own. It was important to them. And I asked them, what's this all about? And they said to me, well, we didn't want people to think we're just playing games. Right? The third thing I learned is that there's a big difference between someone finding their passion and assigning it. And I had an experience with an honors student who came to my office wanting to write her honors thesis. Now, this is a straight-A student, probably since she was in kindergarten, certainly since she was at USC. Brilliant, creative, sharp, great ideas. And she said to me, what should I write my thesis on? And I thought that was an absurd question because it was her thesis, not mine, right? So I said to her, when you wake up in the morning, what is it you think about? What are you passionate about? What is it you want to do that day? I said, then write about that, because I tell my doctoral students this too. If you don't have the passion for your subject, you're never going to finish a thesis, right? You just won't. It's a lot of work. You don't need to accomplish it. But if you care about it and you want to write about it every day, you will. And she sat there and stared at me for a good 30 seconds. And that doesn't sound very long, but 30 seconds of silence in a room with someone staring at you is a lot longer than it sounds. And finally, she said the most heartbreaking thing to me. She said, I don't know. No one's ever asked me. And I thought that was the greatest indictment of the educational system, that she could go through 16 years of education, getting straight A's, and never once did someone ask her what mattered to her. She ended up writing about rave culture in LA, and unfortunately, I think for her, I may have ruined raves for her forever because she wrote a brilliant honors thesis, but it was very critical of the culture, and I think something she greatly enjoyed. She looked at critically and found some rather disturbing things, but nonetheless, she finished the thing, right, and she had a good time writing it. So I also see my colleagues who do things like, and say, every week you need to make a blog post, or you need to do 3 forum posts a week or a month or whatever. And those things, they work when people have something they need to say, when they're passionate about something. But the important point I learned is that you can't legislate passion. Right? You have to enhance it, you have to cultivate it, you have to find it. But you can't tell somebody what their passion is. And boy, have I assumed over and over again that my passion would be shared by my students. Wrong. Right? Their passion is their passion, mine is mine. And I can't tell them what their passion should be. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing I discovered is that we live in a world that's really changing fast, and that questions today may be more important than answers. In fact, I think they are. And in large part, answers get obsolete where good questions don't. And I had an experience in a class I was teaching on science fiction, technology, and culture. And I'd given them classics of science fiction to read, and every week I would give them a quiz, just to see if they had read it or not. And I ran into a problem with a novel by Philip K. Dick called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? This is what Blade Runner was made into. And Philip K. Dick is wonderful because he's very ambiguous, very complicated. You never quite know who's alive and who's dead and really what's going on, even at the end of the book. And I thought, how am I going to ask a question about this? So I thought for a while, and I thought, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. And I wrote the quiz, and it said, if you could ask somebody one question about what was really important about this book, what would it be? Right? They all wrote their questions, and for the next 3 hours of the class, they argued with each other about what the best question was. Best class of the semester, right? Because they were, again, passionate. They were invested. It was something that meant something to them, right? Because it was their question about what this book meant, not just generally, but to them. And once their passion was engaged, you couldn't stop them. And I find this all the time. If you want somebody to learn something, find something they're passionate about. Right? And then try to stop them from learning. You can't do it. So that was the fourth thing I learned, right? Is that questions can really motivate them to learn. So to conclude, I want to go back to my idea of imagination and think about the world that we're currently in that's changing faster than we can keep up. And we tend to be using things like a lot of multiple choice tests, standardized tests, memorization. And I got to tell you, when kids leave USC, they don't go into jobs that are jobs in memorization and standardized test taking. Right? They don't. They go into jobs where they have to be problem solvers. And that's not something we're necessarily teaching them. So I want you to take a moment and think and ask yourself the question, what if our educational institutions became about the wonder and pleasure and fun and joy of learning? And what if professors and teachers also were able to take their passion, their joy, their wonder, and infuse that into their classrooms? What would our world look like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years if that's what our educational institutions became? And maybe the second question that's even more important is, what if we don't? Thank you.
Pretty amazing. So something that strikes me, go ahead, give it up, give it up. So that was really powerful. What are the biggest impediments to actually cultivating that culture of innovation and creativity in our educational system?
I think that's an easy answer with a difficult solution, and that's the system of assessment we have. That the way we assess everything is based on the premise that everybody's going to go into factory jobs of the 19th century, and they need to be modeled on scalable efficiency. Even our grades, we say if you've got 90% transfer, you get an A, 80 is B. You know, it's an efficiency measure, right? And multiple choice tests buy into that as well. So we're not measuring creativity. We're not measuring innovation. In fact, those are the things that you can't measure on a standardized test because by definition, they're not the standard. Right? So we're missing all of that, and I think that's something we need to seriously rethink because I think it's the greatest impediment.
Do you think that rethinking is happening?
Like I said, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of school administrators, and I have been so overjoyed to hear that they feel exactly the same way. And it's not all of them, but there are some very progressive people out there in K through 12 and universities who are getting it and who are understanding it and who are reshaping their classrooms. And I went out there expecting to tell them my stories, and in fact, I started hearing back from them some amazing stories of what they're doing, and I thought, I just need to shut up and listen to these people because they've got something to say.
But presumably, it's not just about the assessment too, because in college, we're not really doing the same teaching to the test, but there's still that same issue. So there must be a challenge in this teaching approach
Oh, I think it's much worse than that.
Okay.
It's not that we're teaching to the test.
Yeah.
It is a game. And if there's students here, how many of you can recognize this game? Guess what the professor wants. And when I tell my students that I want them to engage their passions and I want them to learn what matters to them, they usually don't trust me or believe me until the end of the semester. It takes a long time to convince them that I'm serious about that. And sometimes the students that are A students, they're great test takers, get very frustrated by that because they just want to be told, what is the list of things to memorize? I'll go do that, and I'll take the test, and I'll get out of here with my A. But I want them to learn something that matters to them, not to me. They're much better at assessing what it is they need to know than I am.
Thank you so much, Doug.